Kabul's skyline pointed again to the international evacuation today, the last of the US core diplomatic staff departing. It wasn't just the planes on the horizon, though, over the last 24 hours. Plumes of smoke marked the spots where rockets were fired at the airport and marked the spots where rockets were intercepted by the US anti-missile defense system, CRAM. The shell of a destroyed car, complete with rocket launcher.
From last night's rocket attack, we assessed that 5 rockets were in the air and went. 3 landed off the airfield, were no effect, and CRAM was able to effect and thwart the attack of one, and the other rocket landed with no effect to the mission or any danger to our personnel.
ISK claimed responsibility for the plot. The local affiliate of Islamic State is the same group that carried out Thursday's deadly suicide bombings at the airport. The group consider the Taliban too liberal. These attacks are aimed both at the US and at the Taliban's ability to enforce security. Today's plot was foiled by the precision of US military hardware. But serious questions are now being asked about another US strike. Yesterday, Pentagon officials said that a US drone strike had prevented a suicide attack in Kabul near the airport. This footage is thought to show the neighborhood where the strike took place, although we can't confirm that. A missile hit a car inside the courtyard of this residential block. An eyewitness that evening.
It was 5 p.m. when I heard a sound and then a second loud one. I quickly came to the neighbour's house, and when I entered I noticed that a rocket had hit the vehicle. We took women and children out through a neighbour's house.
Today there are credible reports that 10 people, including 7 children, died in the explosion. The family told journalists that most of the children were under the age of 10. It's reported that one of the adults drove the car into the courtyard. He was greeted by a large group of children who gathered round the vehicle. Moments after that, the missile hit. Pentagon officials were asked about it earlier.
Do you have any indications that those reports may be accurate?
We are not in a position to dispute it right now, Idris. And as the general said, we're assessing and we're investigating. Look, make no mistake, no military on the face of the earth works harder to avoid civilian casualties than the United States military.
And all the while, thousands more Afghan refugees arrived into host countries. Foreign ministers from around the world discussed the situation via Zoom. And the people still in Afghanistan brace themselves for what comes next.
Well, I'm joined now by Mary Beth Long, who was a US Assistant Secretary of Defense under George W. Bush. Mary Beth Long, when you hear that children, some as young as 2, reportedly have been killed by a US drone strike, what goes through your mind?
What goes through my mind is that thus begins the cycle that we tried to avoid by having sufficient troops on the ground, where the US is forced to take long-distance precision strikes that will result in innocent casualties and therefore not only contribute to civilian deaths, but exacerbate the feelings of locals that turn them toward our enemy because they're frustrated with our behavior.
So do you think that President Biden had no choice but to carry out the policy that had been set in train by Donald Trump? Or could this withdrawal have been executed in such a way as to eliminate this risk of civilian and indeed US military deaths?
The policy of withdrawal when conditions were suitable for it has been the policy of many presidents, including President Trump. The policy that is causing the problems here is the policy of the Biden administration in the manner in which it is conducting the withdrawal. This is a fiasco, frankly, particularly those Americans on the ground that are still left behind in danger.
But given that Donald Trump had set that course, he really had no choice but to act now and act in as speedy a manner as possible, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely not. President Biden has overturned just about every other policy of Donald Trump's. And the Trump administration was very clear. Their timeline was based on a assessment of a secure withdrawal, and particularly one that would be conditions-based. This was in no way a conditions-based withdrawal. In fact, if anything, it has been a run for the hills, and American citizens on the ground are going to pay the price.
Well, what are the implications then of the last few days and weeks in terms of the terror threat to the US and to the UK?
I think we're in a lot of trouble. I think it's been very clear two things have happened. To the extent that we use the Taliban, and I'm referring to the United States, as our go-between, particularly between the US government and its citizens, we have elevated that organization in the eyes of the world and empowered them. The second thing that is probably the most worrisome for your security and ours is the fact that there is now a struggle going on between the Taliban and ISIS-K, the Islamic State Khorasan, and very likely Al-Qaeda. And you will see one-upsmanship and more violence that will threaten our citizens and our interests in the region.
And Boris Johnson has talked about recognising the Taliban as a legitimate government if they keep their promises. Isn't that just realpolitik?
Absolutely. Realpolitik recognizes a government to the extent that they can provide certain basics. But I think, if anything, and while I have a tremendous amount of respect for Mr. Johnson, the Taliban has showed us that they cannot keep their promises and will not keep their promises. And I don't think we've seen really much indication that they're even interested in securing and facilitating the exit of our citizens. So, no.
So, taken all together, standing back from what you've said, all the US troops leave tomorrow. Do you think they'll be back in Afghanistan within your lifetime, briefly?
Oh, I plan to live a long time, so yes, I do.
A good thought in some ways and not others. Mary Beth Long, thank you very much for joining us.